Story 1. The Gray Woman of Stockholm. Steve told me about the Gray Woman many times, describing her as a younger woman approximately late teens to early 20s, but with a haggard appearance. Her dark hair hung to where it covered portions of her face at any given time, so he could never look at her completely head-on. He described her skin as being an ashen color and her clothing a simple, drab-colored dress that looked worn out. These features led him to call her the Gray Woman because of her grayscale appearance. We moved in during the spring. The place was already spooky enough, considering the other residents were all creepy in their own ways. There were approximately 10 units total that sat side by side in this one-story B building. The section of the building that Steve lived in was up closer to the road, and a brick portion of the building that housed 6 of the units. The other 4 units were at the end we lived on, a section that had obviously been an add-on later in the building's history, as it was made out of metal siding rather than brick, and the apartments were a bit newer. According to the locals, the brick part of the building had been a dentist's office from early on until sometime in the 1980s. Which explained the unorthodox floor plans and the need for an addition to make room for more units. St. Eve's family lived in what was once the main lobby. Across from the building lay a small pond, and the entire property was backed by sprawling crop fields, as was a common sight in this part of the South and in this small one-stoplight town in particular. My first indication that things were a little off in this place was the stain. Steve's mom had hired some locals to paint and clean the apartment before we moved in, but I noticed what looked like a spot of mold on the wall of the bathroom in between the toilet and the sink with its old-fashioned medicine cabinet. Upon my asking, they sent out the maintenance worker who tested the spot, checked the adjacent neighbor's wall, and even went as far as to cut into the wall because he suspected a leaking pipe had grown mold inside the wall. When he cut the wall open, there was nothing on the other side. They replaced the section of drywall, and it held up until the following week, when I noticed the stain had reappeared in the same spot. We decided to ignore the stain after that, chalking it up to some weird occurrence that wasn't really a major concern. Then our pets began acting up. One morning we awoke to a loud wailing scream from outside our bedroom. It sounded like a baby, but at this point we hadn't even had our son yet. At the same time, my fiancé ran to the door. Our younger cat came bolting into our room, terrified and shaking. Our other cat was nowhere to be found, and eventually we did find him beneath the couch, but he wouldn't come out at all. We had no idea here the scream came from, and ascertained that it must have been the cat getting spooked by something, a mouse perhaps. We knew the noise wasn't another tenant because it had definitely come from our apartment. Fast forward to a few months later in the fall. I was in the middle of coming inside from hanging the laundry out to dry in the back. We had a communal clothesline, as the building had no dryer outlets, and the families who could not afford the laundromat often hand-washed their clothes, as I was doing on this day. And as I was about to enter the screen door in the back of our apartment that led into our bedroom, I looked into the unit and saw someone staring back at me from the other side of the front screen door. I had the doors open between the back and front doors to allow air to circulate around the stuffy apartment, and this gave me a straight path between the front and back screen doors to look through and see this, whatever it was. It looked like a woman, and in an ill-fitting dress, and she stood at the front door, as if she was waiting for me to return and see her. As soon as I did, she turned abruptly and walked towards the front part of the building. Passing by the other units on our side, I ran through the house and out the front door, wanting to catch sight of whoever it was that had been peeping in our front door. I saw no one. The neighbor of the next unit, Dawn, had been sitting outside the entire time at her small patio table and hadn't seen anyone pass by. Because of the location of her seat, they would have had to walk right by her to continue in the direction I saw the woman take. This was my encounter with the gray woman. I told Dawn what I had seen, and she responded with her own equally chilling story of having had a similar experience in one of the other units when she first moved in and had lived in a smaller one-bedroom on the other side. She would wake at night to feel like someone was watching her and had a lot of maintenance issues while living there, not to mention the crying. She said it was more like screaming, really, screaming that sounded a lot like a baby, like any good true scary story. Why? The real credibility comes with the research. Months after we had moved out of that creepy place, we were hanging out with some friends at a party. Somehow, it was brought up how we had lived in the apartments with Steve. One of my friends, a local to the area, said that she couldn't believe we had lived in that creepy place and asked if we had heard the ghost babies. Ghost babies, I asked, both confused and chilled at the same time. She went on to tell me that the building had been a dentist's office. That much was true. But dentistry wasn't always their only service that was provided. Apparently, the office also did abortions on the down low. As I mentioned, this was a one-stoplight town, and the nearest hospital was several miles away in a neighboring town. There wasn't actually a place in the town to have this sort of procedure performed, and the poor families would get their problems taken care of along with their annual teeth cleaning. This explained a lot. According to my friend and the several people I've asked since that have supported claims of the paranormal happening at this apartment complex, people have often reported hearing a baby cry late at night and early in the morning when there were no children in the building at all. I should mention, at the time we lived there were no babies living in the complex then either. The funeral parlor located directly next door has been claimed by some to have been involved in the disposal of the remains, though that claim has never been proven. The gray woman, I have guessed, may be a grieving mother to one of these aborted children. Perhaps she even died during the operation. The most terrifying about all of this is that to this day the reports continue. I believe Steve. Now, story 2, the gallery of Henry Beauchamp. If you go into this one tiny, dingy one-story bar in Paris, and the right bartender is behind the counter at night, you might be able to see a very exclusive gallery show the lost works of one Henry Beauchamp. But to get in, you have to prove you're a devotee of the artist to get in. You'll be asked in clear and perfect English, what would like to partake of this glorious night? Answer absinthe, no matter what. Any other drink, from whiskey to water, will kill you as you sleep. The next question will regard the type, and you must answer one of two things: the stuff that man himself could not bear to take, or the good stuff. The best stuff. If you ask for any other of synth in any other way, you will be plagued by nightmares for 13 days. Each night's dream will be more horrible than the last, until, upon the 13th dream, your nightmare will follow you every moment of your waking and sleeping life. Don't try and cheat the barkeep. The door locked behind you. You have to drink what he gives you, doom or not. That such a powerful man granted you audience should be enough. Besides, I've heard that the dying complimented his drinks in their death throes. If you make it that far before sealing your fate, the bartender will say, "Be sure you handle this with care. This is the finest I have from here." You may do one of two things. Say, word for word, "I overestimated my fortitude, and I bid you good eve." If the barkeep nods, you may leave the door you entered unharmed and with nothing gained, and nothing lost except the time spent inside, or you can go on. You will be given a glass with a 7-sided rim, with each side twisting ever so delicately around the basin until forming a sleek and simple handle. You will also receive a very, very, very special absinthe spoon in the shape of a key. The holes at the key's top serve as the draining point for the alcohol to pour over the sugar cube, and, of course, an unmarked bottle, stripped long ago of its label, scraps of paper sticking to its sides, covered in the rot of the decades past. The spoon is completely flat, but has two distinct sides, one with a groove along the shaft of the key, and one without. Turn the shaft down, so its groove will be face down. If you attempt this face up, your absinthe will taste foul, your nose will burn, and your eyes will shrivel in their sockets with unspeakable horrors out of this world. Now, if your spoon is the height way up, begin preparing the absinthe as one would. Put the sugar on the spoon, and pour the alcohol over so it gains its color and special qualities. Say cheers, tea. Oh, your friend, the barkeep, and bottoms up. If you don't, the absinthe will burn every innard it touches with the power and pain of sulfuric acid. If you've done it right, the already dim lights will go off and darkness will consume the bar. Don't be afraid. The darkness is the cue that you've been approved for the exhibit. Wait out the darkness and keep silent as the dead, lest the bartender decide to make you eventually not too long, 2 to 3 minutes. A green floodlight will shine brightly on a door on the far wall of the bar. The bar will be bathed in green, and not just from the floodlight. Little luminescent spheres will gently drift through the room, and the barkeep will no longer be there, nor any other unassuming patron inside. Before there's no danger by this point. Consider it a safe point. If you didn't finish the absinthe, you don't have to, but you might need the alcohol. Either way, take the spoon and put it in the keyhole of the green-lit portal's doorknob. It will fit perfectly and reach the end of the keyhole with a resounding click. Inside is a small elevator, but the most beautiful woman any mortal eyes can imagine, bathed in the green glow and just such an angle that the light refracts beyond her into the shape of wings. The green fairy herself will ask you, going up, and considering all the trouble you went through, it would only make sense to say yes. Now, you have one more hurdle to clear. She will ask you, as you cross the line from the bar to the compartment, how would you compare Beauchamp's surrealism to that of, say, René Magritte? For your reply, you must say, "I've come to see more than art tonight." If you don't, the green floodlight will blow out the doors will slam shut, and the elevator will plummet through a seemingly infinite blackness before a real light grows brighter as the elevator nears the very depths of hell. Now, if your elevator begins to go up, the green light will also fade, but in its place will be the cool glow of the moon. But before you even recognize it, the elevator will reach the top of its, well, let's call it a shaft to not get too intricate. Now, I'm not as sure about this as the rest, but I've heard that if the green fairy kisses you on the cheek as she leaves the elevator, you will always be blessed with a creative inspiration, a permanent, ever-changing muse. You can't ask her, you can't kiss her. She has to do it of her own volition. If not, well, nothing, but no reason to do it anyway and anger the woman who's responsible for keeping the Beauchamp paintings safe for so many years. You will enter from the elevator a turn-of-the-century parlor with a large poster of Henry Beauchamp on the left side of the opposite wall. Oh, and the right is a door. Taking the time to read the poster is a fairly good idea, as it explains the very significance of Mr. Beauchamp. You see, he was a struggling surrealist in the 1920s, always making art to try to be free of all premeditation, and managed to do so, you see, after one night in a tiny, dingy one-story bar in Paris. He began to paint patterns. First it was geometric patterns, then complete fractals, then images that would be in the newspaper the next day, then next week, then from 50 years ago, 100 in the future, 200 in the past. Then, on his last night of life, he kidnapped 3 young girls from their homes at night, murdered them, and painted his finest masterpieces in reds and yellows with the blood and bile of virgins. He committed suicide immediately after painting exactly 13 of these. These are behind the door. The first 6 from the left show, from left to right, the genesis of the universe, the only true visage of God as viewable to the eyes of man, the true image of Jesus Christ, the sprawling clouds of heaven. Every pope from the first to faces not yet recognizable, and a portrait of Jesus' appearance in his second coming. The other 6 on the right show, from right to left, the cataclysmic of the universe, the only true visage of Satan as viewable to the eyes of man, the true image of Judas, the sprawling flames of hell, every human embodied demon, from the first to faces not yet recognizable, and a portrait of the Antichrist in his second coming. Now, 6 and 6 makes 12, but what of the 13th? This 13th painting is turned around on its wall pen, the image facing the wall. The space around it is roped up at a very wide diameter, and under the flipped image is a sign in 3 languages. The top is in the scriptures of the seraphim, the bottom in the runes of the highest demonic orders, and in the middle, in Roman letters, do not touch. Now, like the kiss, I can't say this part with as much certainty, but all the same I heard that somehow, as he died, Beauchamp flayed his skin, his organs, his very soul, into some sort of collage. How he took his dead body and created such a horrific masterpiece, I could never say, nor would I ever dare to. So, if you make it, maybe you can flip the canvas over and tell me summity. Me, you can tell me about it over a drink. Story 3. Trans-Siberian Express, Day 1. After stowing our luggage away under the bottom bunk and taking a few moments to adjust to our new home for the next 7 days, we turned to face our traveling companion or the random stranger who made the journey work out that little bit cheaper. She seemed pleasant enough. Her name was Elena. She was 25, foreign, Easter. In European, I would guess, average looking. We could have done worse. After the initial small talk and introductions were over, we took our seats, and my wife and I began chatting about the trip and such. I noticed Elena go to the window and watch from the corner of my eye as she pulled back the curtains. She seemed to freeze suddenly and almost jump back from the window with a gasp. I started to get up to see what she was looking at, but she motioned at me to sit back down and returned to her side of the cabin. I thought I saw something, but there was nothing. I was finding the journey quite pleasant by this point. The scenery was more impressive than I could have imagined, and I was getting excited about our first day trip in the morning. My wife, Elena, and I would chat now and again, but Elena was conscious of the fact that we were newlyweds and needed our privacy. I liked her for that. Come night time, I was pretty tired and fell into a deep sleep. Almost instantly, I don't know for what reason, but I awoke with a start some time later. I could feel a presence, like someone was where they shouldn't be. I peered over the side of my bunk, and there she was. Elena just stood at the window, staring. "Elena," I whispered. She looked up at me, terrified. She looked back at the window, then walked back to her bunk and got in. Turned to me. Day 3 that morning. I had expected Elena to mention the events of the night before, but she didn't. She got up as normal, got ready, and was off the train as soon as we were permitted. I wonder if it had been a dream. My wife and I enjoyed the city sights, ate some good food, and generally had a good day. Back in the cabin, Elena was reading a book, and my wife was resting. I got up to go to the toilet and noticed that Elena's eyes followed me out, almost as though she was waiting for me to leave. When I returned, she was at the window taking photo after photo. She turned to me holding out tea. "Camera, tell me, please, what do you see?" I looked down at the camera. Scenery, blurred trees, terrible photos. She looked at me blankly. "Then you do not see her?" She was shaking violently. "I just see trees." Elena shut off the camera and left the cabin quickly. Day for Elena's behavior had become very strange by now. She didn't come on that day's excursion saying she was ill, and she rarely engaged in conversation. I was past caring. She was weird, and I was cursing myself for being so tight with my money. My wife and I returned from dinner to find Elena by the window yet again. I sat down and looked up at her with disdain. Slowly her head began to turn in my direction until she was staring directly at me. She looked horrific, like she hadn't slept for years. She was wide-eyed and her mouth was open slightly. The train is always moving, but she is always there. Slowly her head turned back to face the window. Day 5, early night. The excursion today was tiring. We had spent the day touring a modern Soviet city and took a bunch of photos of the Opera House and statue of Lenin. Elena didn't come again, like I cared. A noise brought me out of my sleep, a noise I couldn't make out at first, my heart racing. I sat up and looked at the source. Elena was pounding heavily on the window over and over again. I leapt off my bunk and grabbed her hands. "Elena, stop." I held her wrists tightly until she seemed to come round. She looked up into my eyes, opened her mouth, and screamed so loudly my ears felt like they would bleed. Jesus, Elena, what the fuck? I let go of her, and she returned to the window and began hitting it again, relentlessly. I've had enough now. I fucking had enough of this crazy bitch. I grabbed my wife and went to find someone to get us moved. After a lot of talking and persuasion and some money, we were offered another cabin. We returned to ours to pick up our stuff with the porter. Helena wasn't there. Good, I thought. Day 6, I enjoyed this day a lot more knowing that we wouldn't have to return to Elena at night. My wife and I were looking through our photos from that day, drinking beer. I got up to go to the toilet and kissed her on the head. I started to walk down the corridor when I saw a familiar figure standing deathly still by one of the train doors. Elena. I began to turn the other way, thinking I would just go use the others, when suddenly she reached out and opened the door. Elena. No, I tried to run her, but she just jumped. Like that. She was just gone. Shit. I closed the door and ran to get someone. She dropped her camera, so I swept it up on my way. I don't know why exactly. Day 7, the train had been stopped for some time now, and I had answered as many questions as I could. We had been told we would continue to the next station at some point where my wife and I would get off. Given the circumstances, I wanted off the train anyway. It started up again. I was relieved. I sat down on my bunk and reached into my bag to get Elena's camera. I knew I should have given it to the police, but something inside stopped me. I flicked it on and started scrolling through her photos. I felt sad to see the shots she had taken on the station and of the empty cabin on H. A first day. She must have been as excited as we were, I'm sure. Suddenly I froze. I'd come to the blurred scenery shots she'd shown me days back, only this time I could see something amongst the trees. I zoomed in slowly. My heart was hammering hard against my chest as my brain tried to take in what my eyes were seeing. There amongst the blurred trees and forestry was a woman, stood there, staring up at the camera, her face frozen in an eternal scream. I flicked to the next picture. She was there again, and the next and the next. She was in each and every photo, no matter where Elena had taken the photo, at what angle. The woman was there. I kept flicking through. I must have gone through over 100 photos, and there she was again and again. Then she was on the train. The PH photo was taken from inside our train, and she was there at the end of the corridor, stood at an awkward angle looking at the camera, her face still frozen in a scream. The next photo she was closer. He was walking towards Elena. She was getting closer. I got to the final photo, and my blood ran cold. Her terrifying face was right up to the lens. I threw the camera down onto the bed and ran to the window, ripping back the curtains. A scream caught in my throat. There amongst the trees, in the distance I could see her, the woman, staring up at me from afar. My eyes followed her until she was out of sight. Then I looked back to my original focus point, and there she was again. I repeated these eye movements over and over, and she was always there. My wife came in at this point. What are you looking at? I stared at her, horrified and unable to move. The train is always moving, but she is always there. Story 4. Kissy Sykes, September 14th. My doctor suggested I start keeping a journal in order to organize my thoughts, said it would help reduce stress, and God knows I need that. I don't even know what to write. I've never done the journal thing before, but I guess I'll start simple. My name is Milo Stokes. I'm a corporal in the U.S. Marines stationed at Cherry Point, North Carolina. Almost a year ago, my wife left me after for years. Said she couldn't take this lifestyle anymore. Can't say I blame her, though. If I had a way out, I'd take it too. This place is a fucking hole. But I don't. September 23rd. It's been a little while since my first entry. What can I say? This shit's new to me, though I'll admit writing whatever I happen to be thinking is sort of liberating. As of right now, nothing new to report. Same old bullshit. At work, drinking every night, screaming at the walls, you know, normal stuff. September 26th. Okay. So I'm really hoping my own fucking journal isn't gonna judge me here. But I've always been kind of afraid of the dark. Not the dark itself, but the prospect of what may be in it, the unknown. And, don't get me wrong, this doesn't mean at all that I avoid it. On the contrary, I'm sort of a thrill seeker and get a rise out of scaring the shit out of myself. Marry my ex, by the way, and I used to hang out in graveyards at night. Kinda weird, I know, taking pictures just in the hope that we would find something. And her, man, she would see shit all the time, especially here, in this house. One night shortly after we had moved in, I was in the living room watching TV. She had headed to bed. After a while I heard some loud movement and she shouted my name. I rushed over and into the bedroom, but find her sitting up in bed, blankets up to her chin, staring wide-eyed at one particular spot in the room. She explained that she was falling asleep when she heard a sound, something like a knee cracking, coming from the direction of the closet. She looked over to see a man in uniform staring at her from the closet doorway. Well, not staring at her, she elaborated, more staring through her. She had glanced at the bedroom door when calling my me, and when she looked back, the man was gone. The next day she described him to me. Going on Google, I searched the specifics of his uniform and found it was a Marine Corps service uniform from the WWI era. She saw him a few more times, once just standing in the hallway, staring through her. Nothing particularly threatening. He was just kind of there, watching. September 27th. Fell asleep typing last night. Never finished the entry. Woke up late for work. Got bitched at the usual. So anyway, after she started seeing this guy, we would do like we saw on the paranormal shows and set up a recorder to see if we could catch any strange sounds or voices digitally. We met with some success. We got a few weird sounds as well as some moderately audible voices. Every time, it would be a deep man's voice. Sort of what we expected. Throughout the time we did this, we got some that were memorable, such as "He's not a bad boy," which I could only ask. Hume referred to our newly bought beagle puppy, Dayton. It's so cold. Here is another one we could make out deep and raspy. Again, not altogether surprising, as we had a habit of keeping the AC lower than most people would find comfortable year-round. But the one that stuck out and haunts me to this day happened probably a few months before we split. I was still recording mostly out of habit. When one day I heard "we won't always be here." The next few lines were hard to make out, but it definitely ended with "protect you." I still wonder what he meant by "protect you." September 29th. So in relation to my last entry, the voices on the recording stopped altogether when she left. I literally heard nothing, not even the static that used to permeate the spaces in between the messages he would leave us. But recently strange things have been happening around the house. I'll see what looks like children playing outside the windows, but when I go to check, there's nothing there. Probably just the nerves. Gonna finish this drink then. Head to bed. October 1st. All right, I was on duty at the barracks last night and some weird shit went down. I let my duty take the first sleeping post, and in those few hours I was totally alone in the duty hut. No one went in or out. So tell me why I found a fucking ragdoll just sitting in the middle of the passageway just outside. All of the Marines that live here are at least 17 and up. Who the hell would own a ragdoll, and who would leave it just lying in the middle of the hall? Staring at me, October 2nd. I am having a hard time typing this, as my hands are shaking pretty badly. All these recent incidents going on lately have been of a totally different manner than the ones I'm used to. No strange but accurate observatio. NS on the state of the house. No still harmless specters standing in the halls and closet. I've been hearing voices without the recordings now. Kids' voices, and occasionally I'll hear the voice of an older woman, and then everything will stop, dead silence. This all reminded me of the time we started looking for info on our uniform ghost. Looking up the legends and ghost story that Cherry Point has gathered over the years since its construction. We didn't find anything on our WWI Marine. This is what we did find. Havelock Marine Corps Air Station, Cherry Point. It is said the ghost of Kissy Sykes haunts the flight line and the housing looking for her children. She does not like men, and the men who yell at kids are in big trouble. There is a story of a young GLCPL on post was found the next morning, huddled in a ball in the corner of the guard shack crying she wants her kids. She wants her kids. In the housing you can hear children playing, and from personal experience Kissy herself appears in children's bedrooms after they are put to bed. Toys in the children's rooms are moved when they aren't even there. There are and wide different stories as to Kissy's origin, but the most common theme is that she and her children were abused and murdered by her husband, who had returned from the war suffering from shell shock, now known as post-traumatic stress disorder. She and her children were married together on base, but upon construction of the current flight line, half of the graveyard was relocated to another section of the installation, separated from the graves of her children. She now searches for them, taking vengeance on men who have mistreated their families. Being the graveyard rats we set out not long after to learn what we could about Kissy Sykes. We found her grave on one side of the flight line, and just as the website described, on the other side there were several smaller graves, some bearing only a first name, most without any dates. And suddenly, the only thing I hear in the ears of my mind are that last recording I got from our uniformed guardian. We won't always be here. Protect you. The light's just cut out. Except for the light of my computer screen, the entire house is pitch black. What do you want from them? Police report October 4th, after missing an entire workday, Corporal Milo Stokes was reported missing by his platoon. TMO was immediately dispatched to his residence to investigate and soon found him dead sitting at his computer desk. The cause of death has not yet been clearly determined. However, the rate of suicide within the Marine Corps is currently the highest in the nation. Upon investigation, it has been speculated that Corporal S. Stokes took his own life in a manner yet to be determined in response to increasing workplace pressures, an alcoholic tendency, and his pending divorce. End of report. Story 5. I'll never work a closing shift again. I used to work for a Subway next to a liquor store along a fairly busy road. I hated the job, but I was only working there on Friday and Saturday evenings to make some extra money. The customers were friendly enough, referring to me as the blue-eyed girl as we didn't have name tags. My co-workers were all right as well, being fun and interesting people, but my boss was a jerk. Luckily, I didn't have to see him often because he was only around during the mornings. Yet, he'd always find a way to make my job more stressful. My boss would constantly say that our store was doing poorly in profits and would make it so that only one person would be working for hours alone. I have no idea what he was talking about because whenever I was working I felt as though every resident in our city would make an appearance at some time during my shift. Luckily, I had a coworker with me until about an hour before close, something I was truly grateful for. That all changed after minimum wage went up. My boss figured he'd save the money he was losing by cutting hours even more. So instead of working with someone until 8:30 p.m. or 9 p.m., I would be alone from 6 p.m. until close, something that worried my mother and boyfriend. They didn't particularly like the thought of me being alone in the store. For that long as I'm a girl, I didn't like the thought of it either. But what could I do? I dreaded the following weekend when the new schedule would be in effect. On Friday, my boyfriend agreed to stay with me until close, but on Saturday, he couldn't, and so I begrudgingly made my way to work for 5 p.m. on that day. I worked with someone else until 6 p.m., and then they left. I was now in the store alone. I was hoping it'd be dead in the store since a football game was on that night, and this proved to be true. Not many people came in. So with the spare time, I started cleaning things early as I knew it would take a lot long to get everything done without anyone else helping me, and I'd bring many empty containers to the back room to wash them, returning to the front whenever I would hear the door alarm go off signaling that a customer had just walked in. This went on for a couple of hours, and I hated every moment of it. I was in the back around 9 p.m. trying to finish washing some things when I heard the door alarm go off. We would be closed in just a half hour. So this was the point in my shift where I truly despised getting any customers. I finished rinsing the bowl I was washing and then reached for a paper towel, walking to the front to greet my unwanted customer. Much to my surprise, no one was there. I didn't see any cars out front, but I looked around the store briefly before returning to the back room. Whoever it was, they must have decided they didn't want anything. Not that I minded. A couple of minutes passed, and then I heard the door alarm go off again. I briskly walked to the front expecting a customer to be standing there looking at the menu, but when I got there I did not see anyone standing there ready to order. Instead, I found a man sitting on the far end of the store. At the back table, he appeared dirty with scraggly hair and mud all over his pants. He tracked some men I could see and wasn't happy about it, knowing that I'd have to remop the flue. RS. Despite my irritation, I greeted the man. "Hello, sir. Are you waiting on someone or wanting a minute to look over the menu?" He kept looking back and forth from wall to wall and to Casio. Nally out the window, he almost appeared disoriented, but would look at his phone every once in a while as though he were expecting a message from someone. He was fiddling with something in his pocket, but wouldn't take it out. Most importantly, he didn't respond to my question, and I was getting pretty annoyed. "Well, we'll be closing in 20 minutes, sir. Please keep that in mind." Again, he didn't respond. Just kept looking everywhere and anywhere but toward me. With an irritated sigh, I walked to the back room and began preparing the mop bucket, filling it with water and floor clean. This probably took about 2 minutes. Once it was ready, I wheeled it toward the front and quickly noticed that the man wasn't there anymore. He couldn't have left the store. However, I would have heard the door alarm go off if it had been opened. I grabbed my mop and looked toward the ground, where I then noticed a set of muddy footprints leading toward the bathroom door. Great, lines have to mop the bathroom again, too. I began mopping the trail leading toward the table where the man had sat, and then all the way toward the bathroom door. As I finished cleaning the floor directly in front of the door, I heard the faint, muffled cries of someone on the other side. I leaned in until my ear was almost against the door itself and listened silently. I could hear quiet sobs mixed with some words like, "No, and I can't." What on earth was going on in there? I took a step back as quietly as I could and then was surprised by the sound of the door being unlocked. I immediately jumped away with mop in hand and was a good 10 feet away when the door opened. The man emerged and stood there for a couple of moments. When he saw me standing then for the first time he looked me straight in the eye. This sent a chill down my spine. I held on to the mop nervously, almost defensively. His stare was blank and yet somehow sorrowful. He didn't say anything and quickly walked out the front entrance, setting off the door alarm. I turned and saw him make his way down the road. Never looking back, I took a breath, loosening my grip on the mop, and looked back toward the bathroom door. I reached for the handle and slowly opened the door, quickly peering around inside before actually entering. When I walked inside, I found a giant mess all over the floor, as though the man had been walking in circles in there. I sighed and quickly mopped up the filth and turned to leave when I noticed the garbage can lid was on the ground beside it. I reached for it, bending over the can itself in order to retrieve it when I happened to notice something shining inside. I could feel my face grow pale when I reached in and retrieved an open switchblade. The only other thing in the can was a crumpled piece of paper. I reached for it and slowly opened it. The words on it still haunt me to this day. For 135 Wilson Road, Brun, et Blue Eyes, Saturday 9 p.m., $1,200. I closed the store early that night. I didn't finish washing the dishes and didn't bother sweeping or mopping the back room. I just locked the door, put the food away, counted my drawer, and left. I quit the next day. I told my mom about what had happened and she called the police. I gave them my description of the guy as well as the knife and note I had found. They thanked me for my information and told us that they'd do what they could to find the guy. My mom still freaks out about it and won't let me get another job. I don't go out as often and I feel nervous every day. I always feel as though I'm being watched or hunted. I still wonder about that note sometimes, but in all honesty, I don't want to know. Whoever wrote it, whoever wanted to hurt me, I don't want to know. I may never know anyway, but one thing I do know is that I'll never work a closing shift again. Story 6. The ceremony when you are met with a sort of anxiety, which ultimately is there to make you consider the possibility that your own memory is a lie. It is only natural to face difficulty in recalling even things that happened a short time ago. If I.W. as open to undertaking so thorough an examination of this, then I am confident that I would identify a good few reasons for the acute nervousness I feel. Even so, it should go without saying that I am not inclined to accept my emotion as fully justified. It undoubtedly rests on some sinister delusion. I am a policeman, being the first to answer to the call of my higher-ranking officer. I had to come to this location in order to investigate the demise and apparent suicide of the youth who used to live here. This much I certainly did with the help of the apartment's owner. I went in and had a look at the ominous and gloomy space over which loomed 1,000 printed pages from the shelves of a small bookcase. I then had a look at the air shaft, that parallelogram chasm which had just devoured a human being. Some momentary agitation ensued because the owner appeared again outside the apartment, so as to notify me that people had reached the bottom of the air shaft from an opening on the first floor and were about to carry the body away. His statement was immediately verified as I looked again at the now empty air shaft. From that distance, I could not help but notice the blood on the floor could barely be distinguished from the multitude of shadows cast by window lights of so many floors. After that I returned to the room with the bookcase, having first contacted my superior officer, who asked me to wait for him there. If I decided to read one of the countless pages, it was only because time seemed to barely pass at all. But one look was enough for me to realize they constituted the journal of the dead man. Indeed, my idea to pry at anything of the kind was quite aberrant, given that I was never meant to read those pages, and I do believe that I was reacting to the fact that my rank in the force categorically forbid me from having even a passing look at such documents. And what made this urge to see them all the harder to resist was my awareness of the imminent arrival of my superior officer, after which it would obviously be impossible for me to do anything of the kind, having randomly chosen one of the POG. I started reading some of the dead person's thoughts. According to what was written, he firmly believed. I had to suppose that his reasons for believing such a thing were already presented in detail in other pages, that upon falling into the air shaft, he would instantly transition to a new and happier life from the one he'd leave behind. My curiosity was piqued by a phrase where he argued that just as he came into this life by passing through a corridor, he would now enter the next one through another vertical corridor. And thus I continued reading his notes. On another page, he reflected that he wasn't sure of what specifically would happen after his death. He did envision a transition However, it had been impossible to ascertain the exact elements of his future existence. That page came to a close with his hypothesis, which rested on the sense that the actual development would possibly be very difficult to guess, owing to reasons pertaining to the strangeness of the event itself, and therefore pontificating might not lead to any conclusions. Perhaps then, this was the specific hypothesis. What was to take place would be something by all means unheard of. For example, it remained a distinct possibility that 1 second after the end of his agony, as he lay fallen on the concrete floor of the air shaft, he would once again be back to his apartment, and maybe he'd then be looking at the empty air shaft much in the same way he would have done 1 instant prior to his fall. He alleged that for this supposition some kind of a basis might be provided, thing that he had, after all, in the past been involved, on and off, which was to be expected, given that the supposition itself being of so uncanny a nature that it couldn't allow for persistence, with a minor ceremony through which he had perhaps managed to predetermine just how he was to pass from this life to the next. If the ceremony had the power he seemed to attribute to it, it seemed Hetty was to inhabit the body of someone else, namely of the first person to arrive at the apartment following his demise, with the transition being instantaneous and completely painless. In such a turn of events he might even have forgotten who he had been before, because his transformation to the other person would be total. Nevertheless, the new man inevitably was to be animated by his O.L.D. conscience, despite the fact that this realization could take a while to occur to him and would only be reached by steps. After that I read more of the pages, but nowhere else was any other elaboration about the ceremony to be found, and instead I only came across passing references to it. I did notice a sentence where the dead man expressed his wonder about the type of person whose body he was to possess, and the eminently reasonable, in context, thought of his that it would most likely be either the elderly owner of the apartment or some member of the police forces upon to investigate his act of suicide did not alarm me in the slightest, despite its potential to acquire a particular meaning. That is one which would involve me in this affair, and I instead chose to welcome it with a smile. This was to change, however, because upon trying to choose a third page to read I immediately saw there the word policeman written a number of times. At that point I indeed felt a little sick, so I avoided reading more of the journal. My senior officer still had not arrived. I remained there, alone, with those pages piled in front of me, yet by now my impression of them was that they weren't so much a deceased stack, but more something akin to a well-kept secret. Indeed, one which might almost concern me personally. Soon after that, I discovered that my memory was diminishing, and, as I noted at the start, I did attribute this effect to having been deeply influenced and disturbed by what I had read. Is it not paradoxical that I, a sensible man, a man almost not at all given to flights of fancy, particularly when it comes to this type of situation, am now fretting on account of just reading some text? Even so, I have resolved to quickly, before the chief inspector gets here, these pages which I wrote down, waiting for his arrival, and having used the pen and paper of the dead man to do so, and hide them inside that pile of the thousands of pages he wrote, as if my own also had been part of his journal. And I wish to act in this way because I keep some hope that if I make such a concession to my superstitious line of thinking, I may be allowed to avoid any other agonies of the kind which seem to have ambushed me in this place. Apart from all that, though, I should note that despite the accidents in this room of a mirror next to the bookcase and a little to the back, leaning on to the edge of a heavy knit stand, I didn't dare all this time to look at my reflection, and not just out of fear of what I might possibly observe there, but for another, far more ominous reason, because it seems to me that I have even forgotten how my visage is supposed to look. And now indeed my urge to read more of these pages can never be abated. Story 7. Adelaida and Cruve. The realm was beauteous and plentiful, its people more so. No plague touched its borders, no famine its lands war, was seldom seen in this kingdom, whose peaceful lords ran their fortified estates in harmony with one another. The only problem was that peasants were treated harshly, scraping to live on the scraps of land provided to them by their lords. Besides this, the nobles were amiable and open with their dealings with one another, with one exception. In the southernmost castle of this bountiful landscape live Ed, an estranged baron, and his wife, though seldom seen. They were both said to be startlingly beautiful youths, albeit rather sallow. Despite this, the Baron Cruve and his young wife, Adelaida, were a reclusive couple, only leaving their citadel in the utmost emergency. They never attended holiday feasts or tourneys held by the noblemen. The knights of their court were seldom seen in festive jousts. It was therefore a shock when it was said that the Baron was to throw a jousting tournament in honor of his wife's naming day. There was to be a feast following the eve of the day, which would continue late into the night and into the early hours of the next morning. The noble men and women were ecstatic for the event. Knights trained, ladies gossiped, and nobles prepared their families for the festivities. All the while the small folk would notice caravans of food, decor, lavish cloths, and other such things passing through their towns, bound south to the domain of the Baron. This change was very sudden and new for the people of the land, who fantasized about the celebration to come. The day of the feast approached quickly. Those of Ire birth donned their best attire, knights bore their armor, and everyone from the northern domains all the way to the south packed and left for the journey to Castle Cruve. As the numerous families traversed through foggy wetlands and dense woods, a startling sight met their eyes: the dark and grasping spires of Castle Cruve. Each dark stone tower clawed its way into the sky, casting a gloom and dismal aura about the battlements. While none could deny the macabre aspects of the castle, it also had an air of beauty with its lush birch forest and surrounding grounds, and although the castle was undeniably unsettling, it too had aspects of beauty in its cold stone walls. It was these sights that greeted the ecstatic nobles and knights as they completed the fina stretch to the festivities. Upon entering Castle Cruve, the revelers were led to various wings of the estate, in which they could clean themselves and rest from their travels for the evening to come. An hour after the last guests arrived, a servant of the house announced that the first of the jousts were to begin promptly. Lords and ladies greeted each other exuberantly in the decorated halls of the mighty, elegant fortress as the knights and squires proceeded to the field where the joust was to be held. The pageantry of the Crewe family hung proudly from the halls and street, made from the tops of walls and towers. The heraldry of knights flew from tents, horses, and tabards, and the excited chitterings of near 100 highborns could be heard through the entirety of the arena. Finally, another herald in the service of the Crews announced that his lord and lady would not be attending the jousts. He apologized hastily on behalf of his benefactors and swiftly departed. A small cry of dissent sounded from the amassed guests, but was swiftly silenced as the castle's master of arms entered the field to commence the first match. Horses charged, lances broke, knights rolled in the dirt. The crowd cheered their favorites and booed their rivals, all the while gossiping and chatting away. By the time of the final match, everyone's voice was hoarse from overuse, yet their enthusiasm did not wane after the sun had started to set and the winner of the day's events had been announced. The noble families retreated to their temporary chambers to prepare themselves for the evening's feast. Lords and ladies clothed themselves in their finest raiments, planning to outdo each other in beauty and wealth. Long embroidered gowns of the finest silks and velvets were strewn about the shoulders of well-off women. Men in doublets of lavish textiles, decorated by the rarest gems, led their families through the torch-lit halls of Crewe, making their way to the heart of the fortified manor. The banquet hall, rows of delicately carved tables lined with cushioned benches filled the room, save for a large central area serving for a dance floor. Once everyone was seated, a loud musical flourish was played by the heralds of the castle to announce the entrance of the baron and his wife. The room became immediately hushed, whole attention drawn to the ornately engraved door on the farthest wall of the room. The doors were pushed open, and in came a small stream of household servants, a few dressed in varying arrays of finery, handmaidens to the young baroness. A small escort of the castle's resident knights followed behind, each sporting their colors on elaborately embroidered tunics. Finally came Crewe and Adelaida. Lords and ladies alike gasped in stupor at the young nobles. Both were dressed in the colors of the Crewe family, red and gray. Both were also infinitely more stunningly beautiful in person than any of the stories had told. Adelaida was a charming and sprightly girl seemingly of around 20 years of age. Her hair fell in ebony ringlets around her shoulders, and down her back a circlet of silver inlaid with garnets rested lightly on the brow of her ivory flesh. Her dark lash ruby lips curved in a slight smile as she gazed over the crowd with stunningly pale green eyes. The long sleeves of her red gown almost brushed the ground, embroidered with intricate braided silver along the edges. The other youth, Lord Crewe, was also pleasing to the eyes, causing the hearts of the younger maidens to skip a beat. His dark hair was worn short, though it still fell about his eyes. His strikingly pale skin mimicked his bride's, unnatural for the location of their southern home. Crewe stood at an average height amongst his peers, yet he seemed to have dominating, almost feral air to him. His fine bone, lupin face scanned the crowd of nobles assembled. He had no smile playing upon his lips, and bore a look of what seemed to be disinterest. My lords and ladies of the realm, I thank thee kindly for coming upon such short notice. My lady wife is very dear to me, and it greatly pleases both I and her that thou hast all arrived. It has been ages since we have had such a feast, rang out the voice of the Baron, who prose, indeed, to laugh deeply and unnervingly. Too late, the noblemen realized the knights of Crewe's court had blocked off any means of escape from door or window. Lady Adelaida grinned fully now, revealing unnaturally sharp canine teeth. The handmaidens and servants of the Baroness and Baron began rushing through the crowds, snatching lords and ladies from their seats and dragging them to the corners of the hall to be fed upon. Surviving nobles fled to the exits futilely blocked by the armed guards of the castle. Many guests attempted to plead with the Baron and Baroness, offering land, wealth, loyalty, and servitude. These attempts were made in vain, however, and many of these whimpering lords and ladies became the blood feast for the fair Lady Adelaida or her loaf. A Crewe blood bedecked the banquet hall, and the court of Castle Crewe at a feast as none had ever seen before, nor ever had wished to see again. The peoples of the land reviled the southern realm of Crewe, yet no commoner complained to the liberation of the realm from their pompous liege lords. It is still said amongst the peasants that any wander past Castle Crewe on the darkest autumn night shall hear the screams of those damned to a bloody fate amongst the vampires of Crewe's court.